everyone, we'll just get started. My name is Caitlin. I'm one part of the quartet that is the Panelists and Science team here at UWA. Before we start our official proceedings, I'd like to invite Brett Collard up to the front, who will perform the Work in the Country. So thanks, Brett.
Thank you. Okay. Kaya, Whadjuk Noongar Boodjar. Boodjar. That meaning Perth Bow. I welcome you here, and in welcoming you, I know a lot of you have travelled a fair distance to be here with us today, and I welcome you here to Noongar country as you sit and learn and listen to others. Nigel, Squatters, Breeders, Noongar Boodjar, that meaning that you Noongar Boodjar. Barbara Nattabi, Wang, Nip, Jinning, Namrut, Jinning, Maya, Marin Darch, WA. This is the land of my ancestors, where they lived along the Swan River, and they hunted and gathered and made their homes along the banks of the Swan River. Barbara Nattabi, Double Town, Kenny Maya, Kaya. When you go home tonight, the traffic is always on the road, as you're well aware. There's no rush. Home's still there at the same address where you left this morning. The idea to get home safely as you travel home. Shuai, Warrawin, really up Murray, Farming, Warrawin, Warrawin, Shuai, Alva. I ask the good spirits to come and be with you here as you share and learn your experiences with each other. And I ask that they watch over you as you're here. Look, I want to tell a story to you people. It's to do with mental health and suicide. And it's the saddest story possibly I've had in my life to experience. On July 13th, next month, is the anniversary of my son's brother-in-law's death anniversary. This time last year, a couple of weeks' time, he was locked up at the prison out there at Canada. Anyway, he was in jail for a couple of days and he was stressing out, worrying, ringing his missus. She never answered that phone, and he started getting really depressed, stressed out. And after about the fourth day, he took his life. The saddest part of that story, his wife was locked up at Whadjuk prison the whole time that he was trying to ring her. So unbeknown to her that he'd killed himself, unbeknown to him, she was locked up in the women's prison for fines, and he took his life because of it. I wanted to share that because mental health is becoming the forefront of problems, causing the most problems in life and society. So where those that work in that area, in any area, always empathise with the person you're helping, you're talking to, because we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what's driving them to wherever they're going. But just a nice word of encouragement, a nice hello, will relax people. Relax what will bring them. And it'll open a door for that person to come to you with an issue, with a problem that they may have. Don't let this be an experience for you that a phone call could have made that boy still be alive today, but he was stuck in the system, and the only way out for him was killing himself. But I wanted to share it because it's in the health field that you guys all work in, and I just wanted to share it because you don't hear these sort of stories every day. And it's not that it's a wonderful story to tell, it's a terribly heartbreaking story that I wanted to share because of misunderstanding. Had he known she was in jail, like I said, it would have been raised today. But thank you very much for allowing me to come here today, Caitlin, and let me share that story with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Brett. And that's one of the sort of 4 key tenets of our kindness and science movement is kindness to yourself and to other scientists. So making sure you take care of yourself and also share those even small kindnesses with other people that might make all the difference. I'll hand over to Nicola, who's one other part of kindness and science, just to give you a little 1-minute spiel about what we do here, and then over to Belinda, who's part of the Women in Science COP, who's co-badging this event with us.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming today. So as Caitlin said, my name is Nicola and I'm one quarter of the Kindness and Science team. We started this project at the start of 2021 and our aim was to promote a more kinder scientific community. To do this, we believe that to become a kind scientist is aimed over 4 main themes. These are kind to other scientists, kind to the environment, kind to the community and kind to ourselves. And the past 6 months we have run multiple workshops and given resources to HDR students and EMCRs about these 4 themes. If you want to know more about it, please visit our website and our socials or come and chat to the 4 of us at the Sundowner later. So thank you. I'll hand over to Belinda now.
Hi everyone, my name is Belinda and I'm a lecturer and research fellow in the School of Biomedical Sciences. I'm here representing the Women in Science COP on behalf of all of our members and our 3 colleagues, myself, Dr. Kimberly Wan and Dr. Lucy Fafaro, who are here today. Our community was established in 2019 and is one of several that was established with help of the Education Enhancement Unit as part of the Teaching Excellence Initiatives from the Office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Education. The goals of our COP are to celebrate, support and help develop talented women across the sciences and the university, and we are really a member-run event where we look to host and co-host events that help everyone connect and work towards improving gender equality here at UWA. Some of our events in 2020 included virtual workshops, an international social media campaign on International Women's Day, as well as finishing the year with screening of a really impactful film, Picture a Scientist, which is coming to Netflix if anybody missed it. But if you have missed it, you can also welcome to contact us and we can arrange a viewing. It's a really powerful film that tells the impact, shares the stories of experiences of 3 female scientists and how they managed to institute change at each of their institutes. We're really excited for the opportunity to be able to co-host this event with the Kindness and Science group today, and we hope that everybody enjoys this and manages to walk away with something useful. So there are several of our members who are here today as well, so please feel free to come have a chat with us if you're interested in finding out more about the community and the events that we have coming up for this year. Thanks.
And just finally, before we hand over to our 2 wonderful facilitators, I'd just like to thank our sponsors and our in-kind supporters who have helped us not only run this event, but I think the 7 or 8 workshops that we've run over this year. So please, we've got representatives from them around the building, so if you find them, please let them know. Thank you, and have a chat. So now I'm going to hand over to our 2 lovely facilitators, Dr. Amber Boyatzis and Dr. Barbara Nattabi. They'll introduce themselves and bring our panel to the front and facilitate the whole panel discussion. So thank you guys. Thanks very much. I'll keep this very brief. My name is Dr. Amber Boyatzis and I am an academic at the School of Biomedical Sciences, just over there.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Dr. Barbara Nattabi. I work at the School of Population and Global Health.
I'll just add very briefly, my pronouns are she, her.
And I'm a she, her as well.
Great. So what we might do now is just introduce our panelists. So we have joining us today Dr. Michelle Toner. Dr. Michelle Toner, OAM. Is an ADHD consultant and life coach. Michelle has a PhD and a Master of Special Education in the area of ADHD.
and has been supporting people with ADHD and their families for more than 20 years. Michelle has worked with many PhD students and academics with ADHD and is passionate about helping people of all ages with ADHD to achieve their goals. Really invite her to take a seat. Would you like to take a seat, Michelle? Okay, welcome back. Dr. Jessica Buck is a Forrest Fellow and Paediatric Brain Cancer Researcher at the Telethon Kids Institute. Jessica is a proud Kamilaroi woman who is passionate about mentoring the next generations of young women in STEM and encouraging more Indigenous students to become involved in science. Welcome, Jessica. Professor Anna Nowak is Pro Vice Chancellor, Health and Medical Research at UWA, Director of the National Research Centre for Asbestos-Related Diseases, and a practicing medical oncologist at Sir Charles Gardner Hospital. Anna is a clinician scientist who completed a lab-based PhD in tumour immunology, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical trials and quality of life research after completing her training in oncology. Anna is passionate about translational science, clinicians in science, mentoring, women in leadership, and patient-doctor communication. Welcome, Anna. Professor George Yeoh is an Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the University of Western Australia and is head of the Liver Disease and Carcinogenesis Group at the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research. George's lab was the first to demonstrate the presence of liver progenitor cells in human liver diseases, and his work continues to focus in this area. George is internationally regarded for the quality of his research and the collaborations he has fostered during his career. Welcome, George.
Professor Nigel Young, AO, is an NMHRC Principal Research Fellow and the leader of the Neurogenetic Diseases Group at Perkins. He and his team are world leaders in the discovery of disease-causing genes and the development of therapies and screening tests for genetic diseases. Nigel is also co-lead of Mackenzie's Mission, a national study that provides reproductive genetic carrier screening to 10,000 Australian couples pre-conception or early in pregnancy. Welcome, Nigel. Ms. Emilie Perez-Wright is a technical officer in the School of Agriculture and Environment, where her role is to support teaching and encourage community engagement. Emilie previously worked in a research facility and is passionate about breaking down the barriers between professional staff and researchers, as well as creating a safe, inclusive, and inviting teaching environment for both current and prospective students. Welcome, Emilie. And finally, Associate Professor Archa is an RAC Future Fellow and leading researcher in the UWA Schools of Human Sciences and Molecular Sciences. Archa's research centers around paraspectral. You will tell us about that later. Gene regulatory nuclear bodies that she discovered during her postdoctoral research. Archa is also chair of the ex-Faculty of Science Gender Equity and Inclusion Committee, is on the UWA Gender Equity Working Group, and is passionate about gender equity in STEM. Welcome, Archa.
So to get us started, we were going to just watch a very short video of a poem about kindness, so we can have a little bit of think about what kindness might mean to us.
Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be. between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans, and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend.
All right. Again, welcome everyone and thank you for your time. Now, in preparation of this panel, we decided to meet up with each and every one of these panelists. And unfortunately enough for you, you do not know all their stories. And we only have about 40 minutes to get through the questions. But as I said, we had a discussion with them and we learned much more about their careers, but most importantly about their involvement with other, especially the junior staff they've worked with and how kind they've been, but also the impact of kindness in their own lives. So we'll have a sort of tag team, both I and Amber will be asking questions, and we're going to start with Archa. So Archa, you've been leading a research group for some time now. In that role, what is the significance of kindness?
Thanks. Yeah, it's you're right. There's so much that you can talk about. I think for me, a really important thing is thinking about the face that we present in a professional setting, and even with HDR students, which is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about leading a team. You know, they are projecting an image of perhaps what they think you want to see or what they should be in a professional setting. But I think for me what's really important is that understanding that we are whole people and there is so much underneath what we project professionally. And being kind is really about trying to see that whole person and the things that we bring with us when we walk in a room that are underneath. You know, for me personally at the moment, my father is currently dying of metastatic cancer on the other side of the country. And I live with that every day, but I come to work and I do what I'm doing. But it's underneath all the time. So that's really what it's about for me, is trying to see that whole person and acknowledge that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Archa. I think that is a really important thing to acknowledge. And I think, you know, we can only do those kinds of the work we do when we have an environment that's truly supportive. I know that Anna is someone who places a really explicit importance on creating a culture which is kind and supportive within the spaces which she leads. And I was wondering if Anna could share with us a little bit about what that means and how that's emerged for you.
So I took over as the director of NCARD in 2018, and as part of that, the NCARD research team was incredibly kind to me by humouring me in allowing me to run some, organisational strategy type workshops to create mission and vision and values, which we call guiding principles. That has been something that we developed together. We shortlisted guiding principles, we sat down in a room, we workshopped them. But then what was most important is that once we settled on our guiding principles, which I'm going to read out here, as teamwork, innovation, excellence, leadership, commitment, integrity and professionalism. We didn't just use those as buzzwords. We actually sat down in groups and workshopped, what does teamwork look like at NCARD? What are we doing when we're using teamwork? What does professionalism look like within our group? What does professionalism look like to the outside world when they're looking at our group? So that's really enabled us to understand what are the behaviours that are above the line and acceptable and what are the behaviours that aren't. And it allows us to note to other people if they are behaving either above or below the line. And my view has been that it's enabled us to work as a close-knit and productive team and to be kind to one another.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that. So, Michelle, Dr. Michelle Turner, you are someone who's worked with people who are neurodiverse, specifically people who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder as a coach. A lot of your work has centered around changing the attitudes around how ADHD is viewed in the community. What might adult ADHD look like in the context of a scientific workplace?
Yes, well, there are many strengths associated with ADHD, and I will get to those later. I always like to share both. But I thought I'd start with the challenges and highlight them, because people assume that the challenges faced by those with ADHD are trivial, and in fact they cause great difficulty. So being aware of them is really helpful. One of the things that people with ADHD encounter is distractibility. So it could be very difficult for them to get focused and getting down to work if they're working in a communal office, and being understanding about that. The other side of ADHD is that there's this hyper focus. When they are focused on something, it's very hard to break that focus and bring their attention to something else that you might need to discuss with them. People with ADHD are blurters. They have difficulty with working memory often. So if you're having a conversation with them, it could appear as though they're being rude and interrupting you because they're blurting things out while you're speaking. What often is happening is they've got a really great idea, and if they don't share it with you, it's going to be gone in a second. So being understanding about that is helpful as well. They need deadlines. If you give someone with ADHD an open-ended deadline, you might never see that work again. But they work really well to deadlines, thrive on deadlines and regular check-ins. And the last thing I'll share is that when you've got ADHD, whatever captures your attention becomes your priority. So you could have a discussion and have clear set priorities for the day. And then when the person with ADHD gets back to their workstation, something else has captured their attention. They get fascinated, totally absorbed by that. And 3 hours later, when you're meant to regroup and share what the priority results were, they've gone down a rabbit hole. So helping them being understanding about that and helping people to remember what their priorities are is something that would go a long way in being kindness in the scientific community. Yes, I'll stop there. I'm not sure how many minutes I've used.
Thanks for that, Michelle. I think from the 3 panels we've heard from so far, we're starting to get this idea that's emerging about workplace cultures, the different people that might be in our workplace, which is what diversity is all about, and the kinds of accommodations or the ways in which we can recognise what those people do need in order to be valued in our workplace. So I wanted to ask Emilie about her experience as a member of the LGBTIQA+ community, what some of these accommodations might look like, and how we can make spaces better for our gender diverse colleagues and students?
Yeah, so I think this idea of changing culture is really important to me because I think there's a sort of a perception that science isn't going to be as understanding or accommodating to queer people and gender diverse people, and I think a lot of people, because of that, would gravitate towards the arts and humanities, and I just really don't want people to have to choose between their identity and their passion or what interests them. And I'm working in student labs. I'm working with people in a space where they're doing their practical work, they're engaging really closely with their peers and mentors, at least once a week for the next 3 to 4 years. So it's really important for me that I create a space that's welcoming and accommodating and inclusive. So one of the accommodations that's really quick and easy is just using your pronouns when you introduce yourself. So, for example, hello everyone, my name's Emily, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm really excited to be here today. You can also just chuck them into your email signature, and it's a really quick and easy way that indicates to people who are queer or gender diverse that you're somebody who understands, and that if they want to share their pronouns with you, that you're going to be somebody that's going to be understanding, and not just respond with confusion or potentially negativity, and they know that they don't have to be misgendered for their whole undergrad, or potentially drop out. And I think this really came home to me recently. I was help run some of the programs for Aspire, which is a program that UWA runs trying to break down barriers for high school students who come from schools who, for whatever reason, don't have a good, a high rate of follow-on to tertiary education. So I introduced myself and I told the students to head on into the lab, and as they were walking in, this one student came up to me, and this tiny little Year 9 student was clutching a little backpack to their chest with a little tiny rainbow ribbon tied to it. And they looked up at me and they were like, I noticed that you said your pronouns before, and I was just wondering, is UWA LGBTQ inclusive? And just watching their face brighten when I said yes was just super powerful, because I was able to provide for that person the idea of a future where they have inclusion, where they are accepted, and clearly it's not something that they expected or had experienced maybe in their education. So being able to provide that opportunity is what's really important to me.
Thank you very much for doing your work, particularly in LGBTQI community. Moving on to Jess, we had a very lovely meeting with Jess prior to this panel. Jess, you currently work at the Telethon Kids Institute in the Brain Tumor Research Team, but you completed your Master's and PhD at Oxford University in the UK. Could you please tell us about what led you here to Perth?
Sure. So I've been exceptionally lucky in my career so far to have been guided by a few acts of kindness which would probably seemingly be very small and innocuous to a lot of people. So when I started out in my undergrad, I had no idea what honours was, and this is typical to a lot of first generation students, which I am not. My mum has that honour, but a lot of people won't understand the degree, honours, PhD, postdoc pipeline that could lead you to a career in research. Many won't even understand that a career in research exists. And so it came down to two people. Our course coordinator, who said, just as an offhand remark at the end of a lecture, oh, if you're interested in research, why don't you go and speak to a lab and see if you can do some volunteer work? And I thought that was really interesting, but the knowledge of how to do that and who to approach doesn't come naturally to people who maybe aren't the alpha stereotype, right? And it took until another lecturer came to us at the end of a tutorial and said, I have volunteer placements available in my lab. This is what I do. If you want if you're interested, come and see me now. And so being made aware of opportunities is a huge act of kindness that anybody can do. And this goes right from high school students who may never have considered university at all, through to opportunities to get workplace experience. That's a huge thing for a lot of people. Opportunities to apply for scholarships. I did not know that studying a master's and a PhD overseas was an option, nor that scholarships existed, until people came to me and said, hey, there's this thing, I think you'd be great for it, why don't you apply? I mean, seriously, what young person thinks, oh yeah, I might just go and do a PhD at Oxford University, like that is not a thing that occurs to anybody. But small acts of kindness and just showing people opportunities that might be out there can make a huge difference for people who aren't well versed in the research field. So this goes for anyone from lab heads all the way down to undergrad students, to think about what they could do to make opportunities available, or just to even speak about pathways that are available, because it can make a huge difference to people's careers and trajectories.
Thanks very much, Jess. I think that this really leads in nicely, is your story, how you began, leads in really well to a story which I know that Nigel has about how he started his journey in the research sciences. Would you like to share that with us, Nigel?
Okay, so we're going back a very long time. So it's 1978. That's bordering on rude, Livia. Okay, so I'm a PhD student, right? I'm a PhD student from Edinburgh at the first international meeting I ever attended. It was the meeting that was associated with the official opening of the European Molecular Biology Organisation labs in Heidelberg. I was a PhD student from Edinburgh with a poster. And my poster contradicted work that had been published by Jean-Pierre Changer's group. Now, I suspect none of you in the room know who Jean-Pierre Changer is. First thing you need to know is he's French. The second thing you need to know is that he was a god in the neuroscience communities. He was one of my heroes. He was the man who isolated the acetylcholine receptor. You know, the thing that connects our nerves to our muscles. My poster was contradicting something he'd published. He was the president of the entire meeting. I'm standing beside my poster. He starts to walk up towards my poster. Suddenly there's 120 people behind him in a semicircle, waiting to watch the great man chew up and spit out this PhD student from Edinburgh. He walks up to my poster and he says, in his French accent, I'll try to do this, he says, tell me why you are wrong. And I said, well, I don't think I am wrong. And he says, well, explain why. So what I was doing was I was paralysing chicken embryos with snake venom, which is something you do if you're a neuroscientist. And what I'd shown was that if you paralyse the chicken embryos, the normal motor neuron death that happens in the spinal cord doesn't actually happen. So what's that telling you is that the movements that every mother feels of the baby moving inside them is actually sorting out their nervous system for them. And what I showed was you paralysed, it didn't happen. What his group did was they paralysed with something different, and they got an increased motor neuron death, the exact opposite to what I had. I said, well, I don't think you're wrong. He said, how do you explain? So I pointed to some data I had, which showed that if you let the paralysis off, you got more motor neuron death than normal. And I had the data, it was there, one of my fingers on the thing. And he looked at it, and he said to me, okay. And that was a huge act of generosity on his spirit, that he didn't, think he's the great man, the student must be wrong. He accepted the data. And that was just an amazing thing for him to do and an encouragement for me. And the other thing that then happened then was all 120 people came up and slapped me on the back and said, "You've survived, well done."
Just know that Nigel has more stories like that. Now it's your turn, George. I'm not sure if you go back to 1978, but
I can definitely better that.
So what was it about your own PhD experience and journey that informed the way you now interact with your own PhD students and your postdoctoral researchers?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this. I love the title, Kindness in Science. Well, I can introduce my supervisor for my PhD by saying that he was a very unkind person. First of all, I was told that he would not be my supervisor. He'd be a co-supervisor, and if I've proven myself, he will eventually assume supervisor status. The co-supervisor was somebody who was a female member of the department that he assigned this task of looking after me. And he actually told me that he made it very competitive in the lab. And he paid attention. There were 6 or 7 PhD students in the group. And each morning he'll speak to those who had great results. I was struggling. So I was the last person that he spoke to, maybe that day or the day after in that week. So I was left to flounder. So these are things that I took on board, and I said, if I ever became a supervisor, I would speak to the student who was having problems, not to the ones who were getting on and getting good results. I was also told that I had to make it on my own. I was thrown in the deep end with a project that I had to formulate and put up the hypotheses. But it served me well because I then learned to work independently. So I modeled my supervision on the trials and tribulations that I faced to say that if someone came into my lab, I wouldn't want them to face the same issues. I would love to facilitate the ones who are having problems, the ones who are in fact being unkind to, because I was struggling and I was left up to my own devices. And I also felt that I was unwanted because I had this co-supervision issue. So I guess that was my mode of operation. And another thing that I adopted very quickly, and I'm very interested to hear, kindness, you're kind to yourself. So whenever a student has a problem, I would always try to address that by putting myself in their position. If the student was finishing a PhD, do you extend that candidature so that you can get the data for your lab? Or is it better for the student to finish and then move on to the next postdoctoral position? That, I think, is the way I operate it. So, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, George. I think what Barbara and I found really inspiring about these two stories is that they're very different, and they both motivated Nigel and George in different ways, through different situations, to want to pass kindness on to the students and the researchers that they mentored in the future. And I think that just goes to show how they really value many people in their workplaces. I'm going to throw this back to Michelle now and to ask her, we've heard a bit about the difficulties which people with ADHD might face, but we did also want to ask you about the value of including neurodiverse people, such as people with ADHD, in our workplaces.
And I'm so glad you asked that, because it's my favourite thing to talk about. One of my favourite things. My PhD supervisors were very kind to me but they hated one another. And that made life very difficult for me. They weren't kind to each other at all. I think they're friends again now. So why would you encourage people with ADHD and other neurodiverse people into your communities? Because they are not constrained by the thinking that average people have, and they will always see a possibility that you might never have dreamed of. So encourage them to say what they're thinking, encourage them to blurt, because you will hear the most wonderful things from them. The problem that they may have is they might not think in conventional ways, and this translates to them not being able to articulate their wonderful ideas in a conventional way. And I thought of a lovely anecdote after we spoke, Amber. When I was doing my master's, one of our colleagues had ADHD, and she was really struggling to finish her master's. She had very important research. She was challenging, one of our pillars of society and doing it very well. She had irritated every supervisor in the faculty, and really nobody could be bothered with her anymore. She was very opinionated and very well informed on her topic, and she was at great danger of not finishing her master's until the Sisterhood of Mature Age students stepped in. And I remember we spent a morning in her home. It just took a morning. It was her work. She spoke, we scribed. Somebody checked her atrocious spelling and her and was checked that her referencing was spot on, and that was the only thing that got her master's done. So that was kindness in science, because we all had observed her hard work and her struggle, and nobody who counted was really interested in looking out for her. So do take the extra time. If someone on your team is too opinionated, perhaps irritating you, take the time to see beyond that, because beyond that is someone who's really resilient, who's been told all their lives that they could do better if they tried harder, when they're trying as hard as they possibly can. So help them to do things differently, because that's what they need. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And still on the theme of workplaces, Emilie, how do you know you are welcome in your team? What are the effects of being in a supportive team?
So I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly one thing that made me feel welcome in my team, but definitely the fact that soon after I started working, my manager did the Ally Network training, and had the little Ally sign displayed on her door, and that was just a really clear indication to me that this was going to be a safe space for me to be open about my identity. And obviously the immediate effect is that I'm less anxious at work, I'm more productive. This has been shown again and again in multiple studies of inclusive workplaces. But I think the secondary effect that I didn't anticipate was that by being visible, I can advocate better for our students. So for example, because I'm visible within the workplace, an academic recently came to me with a question about their class lists and whether the gender marker on the class list and the name that they had was going to match their student's identity. And I wasn't sure, so I spoke with some other queer people that I knew across campus, and this sparked a change in the CAS system. We were able to work together, and now the CAS class lists are populated with the preferred name as default. And it just took this one academic being able to see me and knowing that I was somebody that they could talk to about it and who they could raise this question with, to spark that change, which is now going to affect students across our whole campus, and just make their lives so much easier, because that process of changing your name officially can take a really long time, and some people don't have the resources to do it, and the alternative could be that they're consistently having to correct the people that the academics and people taking the role, and over time that can be really emotionally draining and will affect their work and their safety and their happiness, and could lead to them dropping out. So just being able to be visible and knowing that that's being able to help our students has been really, really valuable for me, and gives so much more value to the work that I do, which in another way could just be quite an clock in, clock out type job. Being able to do things that I value, make my work so much more valuable to me.
I'm sure that work is really valuable as well. So we've heard from Emilie about how she knows that she's in a supportive workplace and what that means. Jess, you could have done a lot of things after finishing your studies at Oxford, but you chose to come here and work in the brain and tumour research team at Telephone Kids Institute. How did you know that would be a good space for you to work in and a supportive one?
Sure. So I was actually fortunate enough to be able to do an internship before I accepted a postdoc. And at the time, there was a few different labs that I was considering, whether that would be in Newcastle, in Brisbane, or here in Perth. And I found that the lab environment that I came to over here was really incredible and really welcoming. So not only did my supervisor make sure that I was getting what I wanted out of the internship, so instead of just offering me a project where I could, generate some data for the lab, they specifically asked was there any other teams in the institute or around Perth that I was interested in working with. Could they help me make connections that I otherwise wouldn't have, because I had, at the time, no academic connections in Australia after being in the UK for 5 years. Were there people around the country that she could help connect me to? And that, I just felt that was really supportive, that not only was she looking out for my academic career, but she was also looking out for me as a person. And I've been, again, really fortunate to have had 3 incredibly strong, successful female mentors throughout my time as an undergrad, as a PhD student, and now as a postdoc. And I think having somebody who cares not just about whether you can do the grunt work and get some nice data for the lab to publish, but also about your career trajectory and your personal well-being, I think it makes a huge difference. And so being able to see that environment firsthand, and to know that this would be a supportive place to land, it really made the difference for being able to be really confident in knowing that I was choosing the right place for my postdoc, and that knowing that I would be happy here. So I think having that supportive workplace and having a mentor who will look out for you, it can't be understated.
Advantages. And we know that Anna, you're a very senior academic here who has created a supportive environment in your own institute. And you've talked a bit about being supported, what supportive looks like, but how have you been supported in your own career, and what has that looked like?
So some of the things that Jess said earlier really resonated, because those very small acts of kindness, maybe seemingly small to the person who's giving them, can have a huge impact on the other person's career. And mid-career researchers can look like they know what they're doing or where they're going. But some of the most wonderful mentorship and support I've had has been over the last 10 years. And I can think of 3 really specific examples. One's a very senior male from another state who slowly worked on me to push me to do something that I didn't think I was up to. And he eventually got his way, and it turned out that I was up to it. And that was a surprise because I hadn't seen that myself. But without his continued gentle nudge and encouragement, that might not have happened. And the other 2 have been really acts of micro-mentorship in setting up an appointment with very senior, well, in fact, our previous Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research here at UWA to ask her for some advice when I was a mid-career researcher, and seeing her generosity with her time and really just that 1 hour providing a really formative, having a really formative discussion from my perspective that completely changed the direction of my career. And that's also happened in the last 2 years with another very senior female who spent time just helping me understand what I wanted. So my message to senior people is, please don't assume that the only people who need mentorship and kindness are those who are early career researchers. It can really change somebody's life and somebody's career, even if they look like they know what they're doing from the outside.
Thanks very much, Anna. We're going to change direction a little bit now. We've been talking a lot about what kindness looks like in close proximity. But a question that I wanted to ask of Archa is, we had a bit of a discussion about why creating supportive environments, especially addressing those systemic inequalities, is really important. And I want to ask you about why that's so important to you at this particular stage in your career, and maybe a little bit, if you feel like talking about it, what that might involve or what that might look like.
So it's a really good question, and I think it's this emerging theme in diversity and inclusion about, do we fix the people or do we fix the system? And we have spent a long time trying to mentor people so that they will be able to have behaviours that will allow them to thrive in a system which has been built up over time to suit a particular way. And I think it's really encouraging that we're now getting to the point where we're recognising that it's this systemic problem that we need to be addressing. So it's not even about equality, equity, it's about removing the systemic barriers. And I think a really important part of that is that it shouldn't be the people who are struggling, the minority groups, who should be doing the heavy lifting to get the diversity that we need. I really felt that when I've been incredibly privileged in my career, but personally the times when I struggled the most were when I had my 2 babies and I was very sleep deprived and working through that time, and it was all I could do just to keep my head above water. I just had to hang in there, and just essentially doing the bare minimum in my research career to just grab and stay afloat. But those times pass and the kids get older and I managed to stay in there, and now I feel like I can give back. But it shouldn't be those people who are really struggling, who are struggling to, feel that they are represented or that they fit in, who have to do that heavy lifting. So I think it is a bit incumbent upon us as we get a little bit further along to do that. Not just to help them, but to start to change the system as well.
I think changing the system is really important. Thank you very much, Archa. And we also know from speaking to George that he's also a sort of person who likes to deal with the system as well. And he's been involved in acknowledging and removing barriers which prevent people, especially women, from having opportunities. Can you share with the group about the changes, any change that you've been involved in making, where you've helped women get opportunities?
Thank you. So I have a confession, because I've just told you about my methodology of putting myself in the position of the student. But there's a flaw in that methodology. The obvious one is that I'm not a female. So I must confess that early on, when I was supervising students, I didn't have sufficient empathy with the females that were in my group. I was unaware of what it meant to be childbearing and what it meant to be child rearing. And to be quite honest with you, I failed with the very early students that I had. I wasn't sufficiently aware of the difficulties that they faced. So I went well out of my way to try and correct that. In another space, where I've been on committees, I've been on the NHNMRC Fellowships Committee, and there's this question of how much brownie points you give to somebody who's had a career interruption, right? And it's very, very difficult. I come down to the fact that we are all individuals, and we need to be as aware as we can be of what a particular person is facing. Very, very difficult. Someone in my group, recently graduated PhD, had an extremely difficult son to look after. She had to bring the boy into the lab to work. Just couldn't be separated from the mother. So these are peculiar situations, but we do have to try as much as we can to cope with it. Because otherwise, that person, if they gave up on science, would be no longer productive. We've lost them in the system. So I think because there are so many nuances in trying to assess, I'll give you an example of where we resolved this. I've been on the jury until this year of the Don Metcalf Award for the top stem cell researcher in Australia. It's a $50,000 prize. And we were arguing in this committee when we had very close candidates, one male, the other female. How do you balance this? And I'm proud of the fact that we finally decided we'll award 2 prizes. One for the male and one for the female. And then we don't have to go into that kind of discussion. And that is one way of solving the issue. Because again, they are individuals. Each year we're confronted with somebody who's had childbearing issues and also other issues. So I think it's necessary for us to recognize and how difficult it is from the point of view of the person who is in charge of the kids, be it the male or the female. We need to be to recognize that. So in order to do this in as equitable as possible, I think it's necessary to have separate awards. Thank you.
Thanks, George. So our final question to a panelist goes to Nigel. And we wanted to ask him about, George has spoken a little bit about the value of people staying in science and growing those people and that knowledge. And when we spoke, something that you really were quite passionate about was the importance of a succession plan. And we wanted to ask you, what does that look like for you? And why do you think it's so important?
So I think succession planning is something that most people don't do, especially researchers. And the research that we do is of genetic diseases, and genetic diseases run in families, and research runs in families as well. So each of us who's doing research, we have research parents, right? We have fathers and mothers who taught us what we know. And we also have research children. And we're kind to our biological parents. We're kind, mostly, to our biological children. And we have to be, I think, kind to our scientific parents and children as well. And we have responsibilities both to the people who went before us and to the people who are coming after us. But above all, in what we do, we have responsibilities to the field in which we are working. So I work in neuromuscular diseases. Before me in Western Australia, there was a generation which consisted of Byron Kakulis, Patricia Kellis, and Frank Nastalia. And they looked after that generation. Now I'm working with this generation, and then this generation after me. And our responsibility is to the people in Western Australia and the rest of the world who have those diseases. We have a biobank of 30,000 DNA samples. Each of those DNA samples represents a person. A lot of them still don't have a diagnosis as to exactly what they have. There is a responsibility to those people. So you have to, I think, have a succession plan of who's going to carry on the work for those people, those patients. And the other thing is, you never know what's going to happen to you. You never know when you're going to be hit by a bus or hit by something else. And I think it behoves us all to look after the generation coming after us so that they are in a position of strength to take over and look after what you have been the sort of steward of for a certain period. You only have a lifetime of research in which to be in charge, and then it's up to somebody else's lifetime to take it on after that.
I almost don't want to say anything after that. But I will say one of the kindest things that both Nigel and George shared with us when we had discussions with them was that over time they've relinquished senior authorship because they think it's very important for the people coming after them to take over the next set of responsibilities. So for me, I thought that was very kind because we've had cases where some senior lecturers hold on to senior authorship right until their graves. So to know that they do that and they as sometimes people publish or perish and they know how important it is for a lot of people coming mid-career and early career to be seen as being senior authors. So I hope you don't mind me sharing that because I was really touched to hear that, and I want to encourage any other senior academics here, please relinquish that position. So in the interest of time, we want to wind up, and we will have an opportunity to have any further discussions about kindness. But what we hope is that each and every one of you has been able to draw out something from this discussion, something that you think that you yourself can take to your team or pass on to other people. So I think we have a question and answer session.
We sure do. So how we're going to operate this question and answer session is that we're going to operate it via Slido. So we have a QR code here. If you don't like QR codes, if you're sick of them, you can instead go to Slido, slide.do, and enter the code manually, just as when we're starting. While you're doing that, we're going to give you just maybe 2 minutes to, if you just want to chat to the person next to you about what you've heard, instead of submitting it as a question. So one of the things that happens a lot when you have question and answers is that people will submit comments. So fine, and the fantastic academic ETAP points out this is just because after you're sitting here for an hour, you're desperate to talk about something or mention something to the person next to you. So over the next couple of minutes, talk to the person next to you. If you want to peer review your question before submitting it. That's not my joke, that's ETAP's, so I can't steal that as well. And then what we'll do is we'll put those questions to the panelists and hopefully we can get some nice answers. So I'll let you know when that 2 minutes is up. Some people had great success in using this app. Congratulations. For the lucky winners. We received a few questions. We received 4 questions, and we have about 15 minutes. I think we could probably get through a good proportion of these. So what we're going to do is, these questions are not directed to anyone in particular on the panel. So we'll just throw them to the panel and see who feels like they might have an answer. Sound good? All right. So the first question is, how do you encourage people stuck in their ways to make changes to their behaviour and become kinder? That's an easy one. Anyone who's a parent might be able to. I feel confident that's a tough one, isn't it? So the question, I'll just repeat it again. How do you encourage people who are stuck in their ways to make changes to their behaviour and become kinder?
Well, you know, the coach has an answer.
Right.
And as a coach, I would say that the thing to do is to never assume. And I was having a great conversation with Brett before he spoke, but it's always to be curious, because as soon as you stop being curious and assume things about people, then you lose the ability to connect with them and really find out what's going for them. So it's about stop assuming and be more curious, would be my advice.
I'm happy to have a go at that as well. I agree that sometimes people don't actually realise what they're doing, and to be discreet and private about those conversations, and to go and talk to them one-on-one and understand, why they said or did, or just really simply sometimes ask them to stop. And sometimes you ask them to stop and they don't know that what they're doing is unwelcome. They don't realise, and when they're told that that is unwelcome, whether it's a comment or how they refer to somebody or how they relate to an individual, they may stop doing it.
I just have one really quick thing, because it's a useful tool that I was taught, is to use the language of intention versus consequence. So when you have those discussions with people, you say it may not have been your intention that what you said would be received, but the consequence was it was received that way. Mm-hmm. So intention versus consequence is a really useful tool for that conversation.
What great answers. Right. There are some great questions here. Would you? I'll hand this to you, Barbara. I can probably pick one. You haven't had a chance to look at it. That was very rude. No, that was very unkind.
You're forgiven, Amber. So again, anyone to the panel, how as a young person can you advocate for yourself when there's a power dynamic in play? So if you're a young person, how can you advocate for yourself?
Oh.
Nigel, you were once young.
I think it's really hard to advocate for yourself when there's not someone that you have behind you. Like, I think having, knowing that you've got someone in your corner, it gives you so much more power to advocate. Even just knowing that you've got someone that, you can fall back and be like, oh my God, I had the worst day, and just have somebody that's going to understand. So I think if we're talking about being kind, being that ally, being that person that's there for somebody, speaking up when another person, taking up that weight when somebody else is struggling with it, I think is really, really important.
The other piece of advice that I have for younger people who are towards the bottom of the food chain is that there's power in groups. So instead of thinking about it as advocating for yourself, can you get a group together of like-minded people and advocate together, there's probably less chance of blowback onto you personally, and secondly, there's power in numbers. So think about whether there's other people you can approach to make that change together.
Yeah. So just to add the power of the group. So we had a group of honours students in the Institute a couple of years ago who self-organised into a self-help group, and they would support each other, they'd help each other with their research and so on. And they were such a great bunch of people. We have a student award each year in the Perkins. So I put forward the 4 of them as a group to get the award, but I think the concept was too difficult for the people in power to take that on. Yeah, grouping together. I mean, we all did it, didn't we, when we were students? We grouped together with a bunch of people and survived.
I think strength in numbers is very important. I can remember when I took on the presidency of the Cancer Council, within a week there was a group of 4 women representing 4 different institutes come into my office and say, Cancer Council doesn't do enough for early career researchers. We are early career research and we want you to initiate a grant for early career researchers. I said, yes, sir.
I just want to pitch, for those who have not watched Picture as Scientists, please make sure you do, because it shows the power of coming together. And women in the US were able to come together and make a lot of changes. So please watch that film if you haven't watched it.
I think I'm going to pick a really important question. I think it might be a little bit of a difficult one for our panelists to answer, so be aware. What are the ways that you have supported women in science and the challenges that they face that are separate to the challenges surrounding childbearing or childbearing? So we had a lot about raising children, and that usually being something that people identify as being to do with women in science. But yes, this question is about other ways to support women in science. Do any of the panelists feel like having a go with that?
Well, I had an issue that I can relate to when I was being very, very hard on one of my honours students because she just wasn't performing. But I was impervious to the situation that she faced. So I asked her to speak to one of the senior people, female, in the group, and it came back to me that this person had just realized that, I've just found out that she was pregnant. And so, all that's tied up with that, I wasn't aware. So only then, by asking her to speak to a female colleague, that I could get that information back. So I think it's important to have to seek other opinions other than just do it on your own. Yeah.
I guess I can talk about, there's been many issues that we've raised and discussed in the former Faculty of Science, Gender Equity and Inclusion Committee beyond childbearing issues. So a really large body of work has had to do with harassment, misogyny and sexual harassment. That there's a lot of those microaggressions that are just so common in the culture. We've also sort of talked about and discussed ways of breaking down the network that is put forward by the dominant group in science, which is men as a rise, so trying to break down the sort of boys network of shoulder tapping. It's getting a lot better, but it is still there. And another body of work we've been looking at recently, which is really interesting, is to do with menopause. So this is something that is a bit of an intersectional issue with women as they get a bit older and might move into leadership roles, and then the effect of going through the menopause and the confidence sapping there. So there are a lot of things beyond the troubling childbearing years as well. There's lots to face, but it's not like, men also have problems they have to work through too. It's just we are living in, our scientific world is based around a patriarchy. It's no man's fault. It's just that has what has evolved over the years. So we have to, again, address, are we going to change that system? Are we going to try and shepherd women through it? And these are the really important discussions we have to have.
Now that almost brings me to almost leads on to a question, and I hope you'll be able to answer it, starting with Archa. We say that we need to change the system to make a more kind scientific community. How do we actually change the system?
In 2 minutes.
There is actually a really encouraging initiative which is underway about changing how we define success in science. So we like to measure things, and we like to measure numbers of papers and numbers of citations. So there is a really important body of work going on nationally about changing, or at least examining those parameters that we use. That's a start. That's just one thing. Maybe others have got other examples.
I want to mention something that Archa did mention in our conversation. We talked about a lot of things with all of our panelists. But one thing that you were talking about as well, in terms of changing those structures to be more kind, we were talking about the value of going to a conference and how that's a really simple thing. But often, and we think about all the opportunities you get from coming to a conference, but that opportunity is only open to those who can afford to go to a conference. And that was a point that really stuck with me when you brought that up, because that really is a barrier which is an unkind one that really prevents who is present in conversation. And from Nigel's story especially, we can see the value of being present at a conference and the opportunities that might lead to. So I did want to add that, because that was something that I think was quite relevant that came up in our discussion. I will just be a conduit for these ideas.
I think I've got just one thing. I think that it's important that we model the behaviours that we want to see in the future. I think you can't be something you haven't seen, or it's very difficult to be something you haven't seen. So if we want to change the system, we have to start by just acting as though it's already acting in a way that we want to see. And I had more points, but I've forgotten them.
I think, sorry, I'm not going to hijack this too much more, but just one last thing, which is that along those lines, Emilie, both Archa and also Anna talked about in our conversations the value of calling people out in a workplace culture. And even though that is something that I think does change the system. And I don't know if either of you wanted to talk about calling people out and what that is like and the effect it has.
Or I can briefly say, it is really hard. I find it really hard, particularly for people who are more senior than myself. And I don't have that many examples where I've really been brave enough to do it. I hope I am getting more brave. But maybe Anna has some more concrete examples.
A bit braver the older I get.
But again, when you are calling people out, you have to be kind when you're doing that, and to respect the perspective that they might be coming from, and to use it as an educational opportunity, and then probably just let it drop as well. So, and again, as I said before, do it in private.
Actually, if I could just add to that, the example I gave before of the academic coming to me, I think part of the reason was because I don't want to say called out, but I've noticed something and I brought it up with her, and it was like, I was terrified to do that, but I knew that I was in a supportive work environment, and I knew that it was important that I mentioned it. And I spent hours agonising over like how I was going to say it and what I was going to do. And the result of the conversation was her saying, yeah, no, I realised really quickly my mistake. I didn't want to, like, that's not my intention. And I was like, I didn't think it was her intention. I assumed that it was probably a slip up, but I just wanted to check in because it's important. And I think it was because of that she knew that I was going to be a voice for the community, and that I was somebody that she could come to with questions. So I think it's also, calling out is not just calling out, it's calling in. I think that you're like bringing people into an issue that's important to you, and I think that trying to, when you are called in, to like take that on and like be really grateful for that experience.
We don't have. Sorry.
So I'm just sitting here contemplating that what future then do we want? Is the future we want one where everybody is treated equal? Is that what we want?
I think so.
Right. So I mean, I had.
No, because there's equity and then there's equality.
That's
so
very true.
Don't start at the
Yeah.
same point. So if you treat everyone equally, is that what you were going to say?
I was just sort of being provocative. But the difference, maybe different stages to this. I mean, one wonderful sort of life experience I had in relation to treating people equally was the postdoc year I had in Oslo. Because in Scandinavia, things are a lot more equal than they are here. And frankly, moving from Oslo to Western Australia in 1981 felt like going back to the Middle Ages in many ways. And I think the society here has a long way to go to still catch up with where Norway was in 1980.
So can we all move to Norway?
Nigel, you are here as a panelist, not as a facilitator. So unfortunately we don't have time for any of the remaining questions. They are very important, but if there were real questions, please you can meet the panelists later on and ask these questions. They are really important questions, but I'm really sorry. We could go until 8 o'clock. I know that most of you need to get home. So now I think I'll hand back to Caitlin.
I just want to thank our amazing panelists and our speakers. This ends the formal part of our night. We have a sundowner with drinks and lovely grazing platters that we spent the afternoon making instead of working. And the supervisor here did not hear that. I was working very hard on my thesis. Before we head out there, we'd just like to give each of our panelists and facilitators a little token of our appreciation. They're all incredibly busy people, and they took a lot of time out of their very busy lives to sit down and share their stories and then come here and share them also with you. So we've got a little plan to try and brighten up their office, which is probably could use some brightening. So we'll just hand those out, and then feel free to join us out in the foyer. Feel free to approach myself or anyone of the Panelists in Science or Women in Science, COP, or any of the panelists if they're hanging around. Oh, and also, before you leave, we've got another little survey, something for you to ponder from your experience, because it's all nice and good to sit here and listen to people talk about kindness and science, but also taking that into yourself, reflecting what it actually means to you and what you can use from this discussion to go forward in your personal life, or your work life, or if you're moving on a new stage in your career. So if you could just fill out and answer the question, what does Science and Society mean to you? You can keep it anonymous, I think, or I don't know if there's an option for a name, but all anonymous. Any option, we'll share some of the ones that we thought were really interesting, or we'll start a little discussion. Because I think the biggest part that we've enjoyed in this project is talking to people and actually learning about their experiences, what kind of meant to them, and how one little thing changed their whole career. So I'd like to thank everyone and then head out to the foyer to eat and drink.